Hey guys, everybody, welcome to the Mastery session here today. We've got Dr. Abelson. We're here with Dr. Abelson, my go-to person for questions about hiring people, learning the DISC, knowing how to use DISC. I've been using Dr. Abelson's DISC, gosh, probably for 10 years or more. And we met about that time when we were working with another company, and which will be nameless. So Dr. Abelson, thanks for being on today. And just give them a little bit of your background from the college days to where you are right now so we can give them an up-to-date view of you.
Well, I have a weird background because I have a master's in clinical psych as well as an MBA and PhD in business. But I've been working with the residential real estate industry since 1983. I actually did the seminal piece or the founding piece as to why real estate agents leave. But like everything else, it took the industry around 10 years to believe me. So I've been working with the industry for a real long time. I'm a retired emeritus professor from A&M, but I am far from retired. We have over 1,000 accounts currently that are using our DISC and our motives and our leadership and our EQ assessment tools and getting involved in our training. And for me, it's always fun to do things like this, Bill. So I appreciate the invitation because I love to teach, but I also love to consult, and I love to interact with our clients. Almost every day, I'm talking to at least several of our clients that have questions or want to share something with me with what's happening in the industry, which is always fun to hear.
I got to give you credit because I've learned so much from you over the years in understanding DISC. Hey, just for a question to everybody who's on, has anybody done a DISC? If you just put yes, if you've had a DISC done on in the last several years, just put yes. It'd be interesting to see how many people. Great. Oh, good, Dr. Abelson. We've got a lot of experienced people here. So let's go over the DISC. Explain what is DISC and the differences of all these different companies with DISC, because I think that's confusing to some because there's a couple of free ones on there, and what we have to be aware of when we're doing a DISC.
Yeah, there's over 30 different DISCs out there, and they all have different formulations as far as what is the answer, quote unquote. The interesting aspect is, I mean, it goes back to like 400 BC as far as the concept. Where there's 4 basic styles. But the reality of it is our assessment actually looks at 384 different behavioral styles, okay, or behaviors. And the next closest one in accuracy only looks at 24. So the one that we have is without a doubt the most accurate in the industry, number one. And number two, the other thing for those of you who are using it for hiring, you need to make sure that whatever assessment that you're using, whether it's a DISC or anything else, it's compliant with equal employment opportunity law. In other words, it doesn't discriminate negatively when you're using it for hiring. The only thing it should discriminate on is performance, because that's what you want it for. Another thing to keep in mind that's really important, and again, ours does, have demonstrated evidence that it does not discriminate on the protected classifications. And all you have to do is ask the assessment company for an adverse study, okay, regarding the adverse impact that it might have in hiring. If they look at you like deer in headlights, you know that you shouldn't use that assessment. And if they can't come up with one, you also know you shouldn't be using that assessment. All right.
What are the dangers? I mean, you've got these free things going on all the time, Dr.A, on do a DISC. Isn't it? My opinion is that the bank of information that's behind the scenes really makes the DISC valid or valuable to that person. Is that correct? Am I, all
Absolutely.
That bank of data?
There's another important aspect, and that is the DISC is a behavioral profile. It is not a personality profile. So if you're interacting with somebody and they're telling you that the DISC is a personality profile, that assumes that the DISC measures everything about somebody's personality. It doesn't. It only measures somebody's behavior. And the reason they're telling you it's a personality indicator is because they can't give you any other assessments to help you understand somebody's personality. That's another difference with us, because we have something that looks at motives, which are what drives the behavior. We have an assessment that looks at emotional intelligence or how people deal with emotionality. We have an assessment that identifies 25 different leadership characteristics. We have 2 that deal with stress. It just goes on and on. But again, when you're using a DISC, you're only measuring somebody's behavior. You're not measuring what's driving the behavior or what's underneath that behavior.
Define motives? Okay, so when you're doing the disc, you have the motives. Define
Sure.
what that is.
Well, there's several different models for motives. I'm just going to use one that looks at 6 primary motives. All right, we have 2 different models, one that looks at 6, one that looks at 12. But let's assume you have somebody who's a fairly intense D. All right, they're very competitive. All right, they like to be in charge of things. They like confrontation. They can be in your face. All right, but let's say you have 2 or 3 people who have very, very similar DISC profiles, but they're very different people. All right, one of them may be driven because they like to learn for the sake of learning. Maybe you have somebody who does a lot of training, and they have this huge presence, but they like to train and they listen to what other people have to say. Where you have another person who's a very, very intense D, very similar on the behavioral style, but they listen a lot. Okay, another one is very controlling. Right, one of the motives actually is called individualistic, and individualistics like to be in control of things. All right, people who are theoretical like to learn for the sake of learning. People who are utilitarian, it has to be efficient. It has to be cost effective. Let me give you another example. Training. You want to get somebody into a training program. All right, they're an intense D or intense I, S, or C, whatever. Okay, but if their theoretical is low and the utilitarian is high, they have to know practically why they should do the training, what they're going to get from the training. If their theoretical is high, they'll sign up no matter what the training's about. Okay.
Well, what about the motive? Is the motive defines the DISC better? So in other words, you can have a driver personality with various motives from another driver. Is that correct? Okay. So they kind of fine tunes what that person is even more.
It's another way to look at somebody's personality. It gives you more information to give you a better, more precise idea of what the person is like. And what's really cool about the motives, only one of these 6 motives has anything to do with money. So if you want to motivate somebody, okay, and they're not motivated by the one motive that deals with money, and you're leading with money, you're not going to motivate them. All right. One of these is a selflessness. People are selfless. I've worked with a lot of hospitals, okay, and I've worked with some religious hospitals. And in every case, in the 3 cases where I've worked with the religious, foundation hospital, the CEO has been a high D, but they've been a high social. So what motivates them is helping other people, not making $1 million or $2 million in their salary. And that is crucial when you're trying to interact with somebody.
I was going to let everybody know that we're here with Dr. Abelson, who's the DISC expert. It'd be interesting to put down, if you know your DISC, or why don't you put it up here too? If the people that are listening, if you know your what you are, just put it up there. I just want to see what we have here. So, we say that a lot of good salespeople are Ds or Is or IDs. I mean, you see that a lot.
Right.
And then you have them low on the C, which is the analytical. Okay. So let's kind of go over just a brief description on each of the personalities, because there are teams out there there's people that need to be hired to teams. And so it just seemed that DIs, and it's not that they're handicapped because they're not. Could they actually be versatile and be able to adapt? Something you told me a long time ago, that if you are totally trying to be opposite of the wheel, and you always said to me that it's highly stressful for someone to be something that they're really, really not.
That's right.
Forcing them to be that. So let's go over a little bit of what each of these personalities are. I know there's a lot to talk about, but the DISC means what? Well,
if you want an easiest way to look at it, okay, is people who are Ds are task-oriented, but they have an external focus. In other words, they look outside themselves. They're not necessarily extroverted, but they've got an external focus. They look outside themselves to collect data, okay, and to see what's going on in their environment. For example, a D may go into a party, all right, and for the first 10 or 15 minutes, they're just observing what's going on. All right, they have an external focus. They're looking about what's going on, but they haven't taken any action. So they have an external focus. The extrovert, the instant they walk into that room, bam, they're interacting with somebody. All right, which could also be the D. All right, so what happens is they have this external focus. Now the I is people oriented. with an external focus. So they like to talk a lot. They like to interact with people. They like to be out there. They want to have fun. They want to experience the other people that they're interacting with. Right? Now the S, what they are is they're people oriented, but they have an internal focus. All right. So they're more, from the heart, okay, from the gut. They're more paternalistic or maternalistic, and they're supportive, and they help other people, and they bring steadiness to an organization, and they don't like a lot of change going on all at the same time. They like things to be fairly systematic with people oriented. And then you have the C's, who are task oriented with an internal focus. So they operate more from the head. All right. So what's going to happen is they're detail oriented. They're quality oriented. Right? They're slow to change unless you can give them a really good argument as to why we should go this route. And then they'll still be pessimistic, and they'll still be questioning it because they're operating from their head. So that's a really easy way to understand what's going on with the D, I, S, and C.
And so now, as salespeople, we are one of these. We lead with one of them, and now we are now selling to someone else.
Right.
There's the challenge. How do we? It's very important, I think, to be versatile, right? And you're adapting to their style.
Right.
So, and how do we work on that and get better? Because we're probably blowing out two other personality styles and closing them if we stay the same way all the time, right?
Right.
I mean, because if I stay, you'll love this. So I take the test, and, when I had to get this job as the coach for the company that we used to all work with, there need to be all these different tests, right? So my wife goes, all they had to do is call me up. I would have told them who you are. And so I go, okay, thank you.
Well, they might not want it. You might not want that to happen though, Bill.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Especially for me. So how do we start to learn this so that we become more versatile? I mean, what's the best way of doing that?
Well, I'm going to take a step back first. Good. Regarding a comment that you said that good salespeople, the assumption is that they're DIs, okay? Yeah. Because that isn't necessarily the case. And we actually have benchmarks that we've done in the real estate industry, and there's two different profiles that go along with very successful real estate agents, all right? One of them is the DI, okay? Because they move forward, they're interactive, they're very good with not giving up, okay? But there's another style that we found that were kind of like mid-range S behavioral styles, and they lead with the relationship. So what they do is they're the type of people who get referrals, and they're the type of people who people, every time they buy or sell, they use the same person because they feel so good about it. Okay. Yeah. So that's another good style. The third approach, and this is happening more really over the last 5 or so years as we've gotten into the internet and technology, you can have somebody who's a C, okay, and still be a good agent. But what happens is they use the technology, and they really understand the technology and the detail, and they don't try and be somebody that they're not. Right. All right. Now, let's get to your question. Yes, it's really helpful to have this versatility. Right? One of the ways is to try and be a chameleon yourself and to change color or to modify your behavior, all right, and deal with it that way. Another way, and one of the benefits of having a team, is you can have people on your team that have different behavioral styles and different approaches. And then what happens is you have them excel in the area that they are passionate about or can easily excel in because that's their behavioral style, right? So that's really important to understand the perspective that you're at. First of all, you have to love yourself, okay? Right. You have to know what you're about, and you have to use that as best that you can because people will see through it if you're trying to be somebody else, okay? Now, there are some people that are really, really good at putting on a lot of different hats, but if that's not you, then know who you are and excel in that particular area. And if you do have a team, then delegate to other people the areas that they excel in just naturally. All right.
Yeah, that's a great point.
To force people to be doing things that they're really not, because people will see through that and it'll come through as being artificial.
Yeah. Now I'm hearing you talk and I'm going, okay, so if you're an analytical and you're a numbers person and you calculate where the market is going, something, you almost have to bring that out in a value sense to the client versus the only thing that I think that if you're a very shy person, which is the S, right? A very shy person in most cases.
The S and the C, they'd be the shyest.
The size, you know, and you have a D, a driver, very demanding. This is what I expect out of this thing. How do you, I know we got to be a chameleon, but for an S, sometimes someone going, tell me what you got, they start to freak out.
Right. Let me be an S for a second. Okay. And here we are, you know, when you're interacting with the D as an S. And my comment would be, well, what is it that you're looking for? How can I help you? All right. What are the most important things for you? I know you're going to give me a long list, but let's see if we can get to the most important things for you so I can deliver on that. Okay. Here I'm using the relationship aspect. Okay. And I'm feeding into where the D is with that. Yeah, I am the center of the universe. I am really important. And I want you to focus on me right now. Yeah. What does the C do? Okay, well, the C comes from a data perspective. So what the C could say is, well, what types of numbers are important to you? Okay, what is it that you're looking for on specifics? I don't want to get too much into specifics, but I want to know where you're at with the specifics and the details. Is the price the most important thing for you? Is it the square footage? Is it how many bedrooms? You know, what is the most important thing for you if you're buying a property? Okay, if you're there in the listing presentation, the issue then becomes, okay, you know, when it comes to negotiating, because we're going to have to get to negotiation at some point here, you know, what's most important, that you actually close and you sell it, or that you get your price, right? So we'll have to look at that. And is it important that we hit the price right away, or can we be a little flexible, maybe come a little high initially, and then if we don't get somebody who loves it right away, in the first week or two or three, we decrease this, you know, the price. All right, you know, but don't dwell on that kind of stuff. So you come from where you have your strength, okay, and feed into where they are. Let's turn it around and let's do the same like little skit where you have an I. All right. So now if you have an S that's interacting with an I, you both are really people oriented. All right. So it makes it a little easier in some regards, but it makes it negative in others, right? Because you're going to wind up talking a lot and you're not going to get to the bottom line as quickly as you should. All right. So instead of showing them maybe 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 properties, now you're onto 12, you're into 15 properties, and you're having a great time with each other. Okay. But is that really what it's about? All right. So you have to answer that for yourself. Right. The same thing with the C. If you come with too much detail with an intense I, what's going to happen is you're going to lose them. Because they don't care about the detail. They want to know about the experience. You know, make it as fun as you can as far as the relationship is concerned. You know, but again, you know, ask them, you know, what they're doing. But again, I's are really optimistic. They're very, very trusting. So you can you know, utilize that in the relationship. All right. But the same regards, don't get into the detail. One of the things that I found with a lot of top producers, you know, it's October, or let's say, you know, whatever month it is, you ask them, well, how many closings have you had? Oh, I don't know. How much money have you generated? Oh, I don't know. I can ask my assistant, okay? Or let me look at the data, because they don't focus on the data. If you ask to see that, they'll tell you to the penny or to the dollar, okay? Exactly. What they've closed and how many listing sides and how many selling sides, and you know, on and on and on, okay? So again, it depends on where they're at.
It's interesting because I'm laughing because I just talked to someone today. Give me a roadmap and how I can get to where I want to go, Bill. Give me a roadmap. And so we know who that was. And so, but he's great. And I want people to understand that, and I think you've taught me this a long time ago. Your personality is not that it's bad. I think you just said that, right?
Everybody has their own behavior style and personality.
Yeah. But we're in sales and we want to make more sales.
Right.
A couple of things that I've noticed too is when we're hiring assistants, and we are the DI or we're this other personality style. Now we're looking for that person who's going to clean up our mess. Right?
Well, hopefully that's what you're looking for. A lot of people hire people that are like themselves. Okay. And
well, there's another thing,
you know, there, and that causes all kinds of additional issues.
We should talk about that, because this is why I believe the DISC testing is so important, so that we understand what we have to work with.
Right.
You know? And what have you learned in the hiring process? I mean, we're a small organization. We're really we're just a salesperson looking to get an assistant, or we're a team looking at building our team up. You know, let's talk about how to do that the right way. Not, I like him. I feel good about him. We had a beer together, and how do we hire the right way?
We're going to have a great culture. We're going to get along marvelously. It's going to be fantastic. Yeah. And then 3 or 4 months later, you look at them and they say, you're not bringing in any money. You're not earning your keep. You're not helping me actually pay for your salary. Yeah, right. Yeah. So it's important. And there's a couple ways to look at that. One of the ways is you get somebody who's very different from you, as long as you can effectively communicate with them. Now, we actually have a comparison report where we put two people after they've taken our DISC and our motives assessment. All right. We have a report, and if they just taken the DISC, we can do the same thing. But we have a report that puts 2 people on the same page. All right. So how can I communicate with each other? What should we do not to communicate? What is our ideal environment? What do we bring to the team? What value do we bring to the team? So people can sit down and have a conversation about what they bring and what they don't bring, and where their strengths and where their limitations are. So people get to know each other from the very beginning of the relationship, right? And for those of you that are listening to this, you can be working with somebody for a year and you can still get significant value out of doing an exercise like this. But you need to use a good assessment that's going to accurately assess what they're like. So if you're interested, contact us. But anyhow, what you want to do is a lot of times you pick somebody who's opposite. Sometimes you pick somebody who's like 90 degrees from you. So it's not as hard to interact with them, but they do different types of tasks. The other thing to keep in mind is if you are to a point where you have a team where you have 3 or 4 people, to the extent that you can, you want to try and get a balance around that, the styles. So you have people who are really good in different areas. We have a team report, and it's fun for me to use a team report because we'll plot everybody on the team on the wheel as part of one of the sections of the team report. And I can identify what the culture of the team is. I can tell people, where it's lacking. Let's say, you have somebody who's like, let's say the wheel is a clock. Let's say somebody who is like at 4 o'clock on the wheel is the team leader, or the owner of the team. And then you have somebody who's like 8 o'clock. Well, you can get along with each other. You'll have an I and you'll have an S. You'll have a very people-oriented type of relationship. But you need to have somebody who's from the top of the wheel. We need to have somebody who's going to be task-oriented. Or you guys are going to have a marvelous time together, but you're not going to make any money. All right? And that's not good, because if you're not making money, you can't afford to pay the other person. And so that doesn't work. So you can have somebody who's opposite of you, all right? Or you can have somebody who's 90 degrees. If you have a team, you want to make sure you have as much of that closed as possible. Yeah. I mean, I've done these team reports because we can put hundreds of people on the same team report. I've done team reports where we've had like 20 or 30, team or a division or something like that. And there won't be anybody on a third of the wheel. Yeah. Well, all of a sudden, I know what they're missing. All right. If anybody,
it's such a fingerprint.
You know what you're missing, because you don't have anybody who's doing that type of behavior.
I had used your DISC for a company, and we did all the management, and we did the owner of the company. Everybody was on the side of the owner, wondering why their production. And I'm so glad that I learned this from Dr. Abelson. There's a problem here. It's like a fingerprint, right? So listen, Melissa asked a great question. She said, what is the difference between the adaptive style and the natural style? That's a great question.
Okay, that's a great question, because that gets into another area too. All right, let me answer the question first. Most DISCs look at 2 different styles, all right? They look at the mask that we put on our work, or how we have adapted, to our environment, right? That's the adapted style, right? The other one that most DISCs measure is the natural style, or what you're like when you're by yourself with someone who you highly trust and you can be yourself, or when you're under stress and you don't have the energy to keep the mask up anymore, right? So it's interesting. I've worked with a number of organizations where they like to hire people who have very similar natural and adaptive styles. Why? Because if they're under stress or not under stress, they're the same person. But it's important to understand if they have different behavior styles when they are or are not under stress. Because it's interesting, because if they are different, you can get them to act under their natural style if you put a little bit more stress on them. You can have them behave under adapted style if you take some of that stress away. So you can actually use that as a way to help motivate somebody. But it's easiest, and if you have a leader who's natural and adaptive is similar, then that's also helpful too, because sometimes you have these Jekyll and Hyde leaders, where they're under stress, and they behave one way, and when they're not under stress, they behave another way, and people are confused as to who do I have today or what's going on. And one of the neat things about how we use the assessments is we'll point at this out, and you don't know how many times I've had all these incredible lights go off on people's heads. Oh, now I understand. Now it wasn't a personal thing where they hated me. It's just how they are. And it's kind of like, oh, wow, now I know how to deal with them. If they're under stress, I deal with them this way. If they're not under stress, I deal with them that way. And that's helpful. Now, the other point I wanted to make is there are a couple of different DISC assessments that have 3 different graphs. All right? Don't use it. Okay. All right? I can go into why, but I strongly recommend that you don't use the 3-graph model, because it says your self is somewhere in between your natural and adaptive. For example, let's say your natural and adaptive are different. Let's say you're a D natural and you're an I adaptive. Well, you're not halfway in between a D or an I all the time. And that's what that model says. And it doesn't make any sense. Now, if your D or I is similar, what do you need the 3rd graph for? You already have it in the natural and the adaptive graph. Okay, so if you're using one that's a 3-graph model, please. It doesn't have to be ours. Of course, I want you to use ours, but it doesn't have to be ours. But use a DISC that's just a 2-graph model.
That's interesting. You said something I want to go back to. This is just how they are. So if we are salespeople, we could get intimidated by a person, or we could just know that's just how they are, so we don't mess up our delivery or our presentation. Because I think sometimes we present to this other style that's not us, and we start to implode. Right. We lose all technique. So understanding the DISC and the 4 styles helps us to know how to deliver our services and not panic and not be like I think sometimes when we're prospecting, we tend to feel that they're attacking us. Right. What do you want? Oh gosh, it must be me. No, I mean, we don't know
what I do to tick him off.
Yeah, it's only been 2 words out of my mouth. So, so that's one thing that I think people need to understand, why this is so valuable to your career in sales. It's like unbelievable. The other thing I want to add or ask you about is this thing about a backup style. What does that mean, this backup style that people have?
Well, I mean, there's several different interpretations of that. And part of that is, if you're not real intense, okay, on a particular style, then you might have like a secondary style that you use sometimes. All right. If you're natural and adaptive is different. Okay. Mm-hmm. One of those might be your backup style. Or what might happen is you might be basically 2 styles, but in one situation you come across this way, but in a different situation you come across in a different way. Okay, so for example, let's get back to the example you're using with the person who's intimidating. Okay, right. It's not that unusual for a really intense D to be intimidating, and sometimes they're not even aware of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay? But if you make the D feel comfortable, all of a sudden the intimidation goes away. Right, because they don't feel it's a defense mechanism. The intimidation is defense mechanism. If I have this wall, you can't get in and hurt me. All right. So what happens is if you make them feel comfortable, all of a sudden the facade goes down. Okay, and they're much more interactive, and that's what you want to do. All right. You don't want to be in this confrontational type of thing. Now, what happens sometimes is if you have 2 Ds, the other one all of a sudden becomes confrontational.
Right.
Okay. And so you have like 2 rams, butting heads. Okay. Now, after a while, somebody's going to get bloody. And if you're the agent, you lose either way. Either you're going to get bloody, okay, or the person who you're trying to work with is going to get bloody. All right. And if they get bloody, they're not going to work with you. All right.
Yeah, and not recommending to fight if you're in a D situation and you're a D. To over D the D in sales, not a good idea.
No, it's not. It's not. Now, some people say, well, I'll do that and it'll motivate them. Yeah, but they're going to be watching out for you next time you interact. Okay. Yeah. And they're going to do the first strike, that way if they're a real intense D. Now, keep in mind, There's not just one level of D. See, that's one of the differences in our assessment as well. Our assessment says there's actually 96 different levels of D.
That's scary.
Okay, it is scary, but there's also 96 levels of I and 96 levels of S and C. Okay, but the next most accurate one, right, says there's only 6 levels of each of these. Wow. So again, it shows the different accuracy that you can expect from the assessment that we use.
I want to also ask you about this thing that happens to people called fight or flight. And I'm thinking, tell me if I'm wrong here. When we get hung up on, because the person did not feel safe in that little conversation, it's fight or flight. So is that true that everybody every 5 seconds is going through this assessment subconsciously, whether or not this is a safe situation? Like prospecting and the person hangs up on you, or you did a presentation and they go dark and you can't follow up. Is fight or flight a real thing with everybody?
No, it's not going to be with everybody. I mean, the more task-oriented somebody is, the more they might get into that task and they might be affected by it. I mean, that's one of the benefits of an I. I mean, somebody who's a fairly intense I, they don't know what the word no means. They'll just come back again, all right? You know, and ask again. I mean, when you have somebody who's doing all these cold calls on the telephone, you don't want a D doing it, because they're going to get ticked off, you know, and if after, you know, 10 or 15, you're going to hear this harshness in their voice because they're already getting defensive. Whereas the I is going to be much more relaxed with that. And okay, I didn't get this one, but I'll work hard to get the next one, you know, and you know, so it's a very different thing. So there can be this fight or flight aspect. A lot of it depends on the communication style. I mean, one of the things that we train people and is in our assessment and in this comparison report is how not to communicate, right? Because that's just as important and sometimes even more important than how to communicate. Because you can approach somebody and just turn them right off. And then what happens is they don't hear anything else. Right? So all it takes is that one thing that turns them off and they're not going to be listening. So we don't
have a lot of time prospecting.
You can actually create that flight because they don't want to interact with you. All right. So, but every 5 seconds, I don't think so.
Yeah. That's good. That's good to know, because I think that we can recover. I think we just got to notice that we're getting this pushback. So, you know, what's interesting, and I know Melissa's on, you know, when I started working with Espresso, I saw this eclectic group of people. It was amazing when I went to their, when I first started meeting everybody. But everybody, I would love to see that wheel, because it is so balanced. Everybody at Espresso, everybody's different, but there's a common thread that goes on. There's something that goes through the entire organization that we have, that all is working for the common good. I mean, so when we're building a team up, I mean, how do we build the right team? I mean, I see Espresso to me has the best on a team of people, and everybody's working remotely. And that's tough. That whole synergy you don't have anymore. So if I'm an agent and want to build a team, what are the steps that I should take in making sure that I have the right people on the team?
Well, that's a crucial question, and it's kind of a hard question to answer because it depends on where you are in the development of your team. Okay, if you're just an agent who's starting off, right, you want to get somebody who's going to be that good administrative assistant, who's going to do those things that need to get done that you're not good at or that you don't want to do. All right. And as you're building your team, then what happens is you need to, you know, get people with different types of characteristics depending on what's the next step in your building of your team. All right. Let's say you're an S, all right, but you want to have a much more traditional DI, you know, type of salesperson who brings a lot of energy and that determination. Well, then you might want to hire that type of person. Or, you know, you might be the DI yourself, but you want to hire somebody who's going to be more relationship oriented. So as you're looking at what your client is like, you can then determine whether you should be the one who's interacting with them or whether somebody else should be the one who's taking the lead in interacting with them. Right? And a lot of times you have these teams or these mega teams where you've got 10, 15, 20 or more people, you know, in the team. And it's important to realize they have different behavioral styles that go with that. But it's not just behavior. When you're getting to that point, one of the things we haven't talked about yet, and what gets into the fight or flight aspect, is your emotional intelligence. Okay, because if your emotional intelligence is low and there's a lot of emotionality in the situation, man, you're going to react, to it. How many times have you had a boss where things start going sour and then all of a sudden they start yelling at everybody, and then you make one wrong move and they're down your throat, type of thing. Okay, that's somebody who doesn't have a really high emotional intelligence. So it's important to understand that emotionality. Again, that's why you shouldn't just look at the DISC. You need to look at different aspects of what the person is like and their personality to give you a really good idea. Because you can have somebody who's an intense D or I or S or C, and they can have a really high emotional intelligence, okay? And that helps nullify some of the emotionality aspects that might go on. So
what looks like, what is high?
Difficult, it depends on where you are on your team.
What does high emotional intelligence look like?
Well, there's several different models out there. Most of them say that there's either 4 or 5 different components, okay, that make up your emotional intelligence. All right. So if you have somebody who's relatively high on all of them, one of the aspects, for example, is your self-awareness. How aware are you of your emotions? I mean, you can be interacting with somebody who's obviously angry, and you say, "Wow, how come you're so angry?" "I'm not angry." "Why do you think I'm angry?" Oh, okay, sorry. Type of thing. Low self-awareness. Okay, yeah. Right? And then you have people who are good regulators. They're self-regulation. Okay, they can control their emotions. I can remember when this technology was first coming out and we were doing webinars, and I would have like 15, 20. In one case, we had like 45 or 50 people on a webinar, and the technology didn't work. So somebody who's got a low self-regulation is already cursing at the screen, okay? Unfortunately, everybody else is hearing that as they're cursing with the screen because they're trying to get it back up because they're feeling embarrassed about what's going on, all right? But somebody with a high self-regulation is going to deal with that, and they're not going to let their emotionality, get the best of them, and they'll deal with it. So there's 5 different components. So again, that's another session that we could have.
Yeah,
okay?
yeah, but that's so interesting because Risa, let me get my glasses, Risa. Thank you. Once you find that there are areas which need attention, someone lacking emotional intelligence, for example, what training avenues might be available for improvement?
All right. Well, it's interesting that you asked that because, and as far as I'm concerned, when you look at the DISC and you look at the motives and you look at emotional intelligence, you look at those 3 areas, emotional intelligence, I believe, is actually the easiest one to change. Okay. For example, self-regulation. I'll just give you an example right now. Count to 10 before you take an action. No matter how quickly you count to 10, it's still going to be a couple seconds before you act. All right. And by that point, the emotionality is going to go down. It's driven by chemicals in our body.
Right.
Okay. And the more time you give the chemicals to get back to the neutral stage, okay, the more you can get control of it. All right. So yes, you can be trained. And we have training that we do, okay, that deal with it. We're revising our EQ training to actually be internet only. Okay. Because that's where everybody's going now anyhow, especially with training. All right. So this fall, we're going to have an EQ only on the internet training, which is going to be awesome. Right. But anyhow, so you can train that. The second easiest thing out of those 3 is behaviors. Now, people are going to tell you that people don't change their behaviors. Right. Well, if that was the case, then we wouldn't have psychiatrists. We wouldn't have psychologists. We wouldn't have clinical social workers. Okay. Because what they do is they work with people to help them change their behavior. So you can, it's not easy. You have to reestablish new habits, okay, but it's something you can change, right? Now, the one that's going to be the most difficult is to try to change the motives, all right? Because I believe the motives are ingrained in us in the first couple years of our life by looking at role models in our life, okay? So if learning is important, you're going to learn that from these role models. Okay, if money or being efficient is important, you're going to learn that. It's kind of hard to change that. All right. And what I find happening, I'll get off subject a little bit, but what I find happening with divorces happen more often because the motives aren't in line. Okay. right? So that's what's causing the clash, because you're motivated by different things, and you might be motivated by opposite things, and even the motives can change, but it's much more difficult to get them to change.
I should have called you 30 years ago. Now that's the problem. So what's interesting about all of this is that I think that if we got really good at this, I think we can sell more houses. I think we could do more business. I think we can have better teams. And, we have to grow in our intelligence, in our emotions. And so when you look at what you've learned over all these years of doing this, I've never even asked you this question, but as you're talking, it just...
I'm glad I'm sitting down for this one.
Yeah. What has been the most fascinating thing about human behavior that you've learned from all this experience? What did you find out as you conclude this whole thing in your life of understanding behaviors? Is there anything that was just totally blew you away?
Well, there's a difference between blowing me away and what I've learned, and that is what I've learned is that everybody is different. Okay, and so I think I've seen it all. I mean, I've actually trained over 100,000 people in my life. Okay, all right, and you think you've seen it all until you see something new, right? Right. Everybody's different, and I always bring that. And how I use these concepts is I use them as theories to try to understand, but then I validate with everybody that I'm talking with. All right, just because somebody is a really intense D doesn't mean that I know exactly how they're going to behave or what they're going to do. Right? I don't. All right, but what I'll do is I'll check out various different aspects of what they're like. All right, as what's going on. Right. So that is number one. Number two, I try to be as non-judgmental as possible. All right, because I find out by being judgmental is I create defense mechanisms for myself, but I also make other people defensive.
Right.
So if I have
Great
expectations, okay, of what to expect from somebody, and they don't deliver on those expectations, I'm starting to think, well, maybe I shouldn't do this, or all that kind of stuff. So it's hard enough to figure out what's going on in the first place, but when you come in with blinders on because you have certain expectations, it makes it that much more difficult. So
That's
number one is don't assume you understand what somebody is like because you've been doing this for a while, because everybody's different. And number two, try not to have expectations unless you have them defined. I mean, one of the things that we do and we train people to do is, especially with performance evaluation, you need to sit down and talk about what are your expectations, and you need to make sure that happens. I'm sure you do that whenever you do coaching, right?
Yep.
I think that's a key thing. You need to set the expectations. Don't assume the expectations. And what happens is a lot of people assume the expectation instead of setting them, and then they're disappointed. And it causes heartache in the relationship.
It's interesting when you said assume again, and not being judgmental. I know, and for those of you that are watching, I know you've done this. You're prospecting and you're going down the list from Espresso, and you hit an expired listing that has more zeros than you ever see in your life. Already you're passing judgment on those types of people, and you don't call. Oh, they're going to be stuck up, or they're going to be mean, or whatever. And I'm telling you, if what you just said is golden, if we just took that out of our head, we could make a call without freaking out. You know what I'm saying?
It's good to have those theories, okay? It's good to have a framework to operate from, and that's what the DISC is. That's what the motives, the EQ, our leadership stuff. It's a theory to help guide you for what you should be looking for, but you need to look for it and make sure it's actually there.
Right. So we got to know ourselves. And I want to ask you this, and I hadn't asked you, I know it's a big question, but benchmarking. Let's talk a little bit about benchmarking, because that's something that you've done in the past. It's really cool. Tell us about benchmarking.
Well, benchmarking is crucial. All right. And what we do with benchmarking is it's really a three-step approach. The first step is we have a process where we figure out what are the characteristics that you need to be really successful in the job. All right. So for each job category, you're going to have different characteristics that you need. And then we can measure behaviors and motives, okay, which we always do. Or if it's a leadership position, we could actually have the benchmark that includes which of our 25 leadership characteristics are really important. All right. And then what we do is we get it down to anywhere from 11 to 15 of our about 50 different characteristics that we look at. All right. And DISC is only 12. Okay, and motives is 12, and the rest are the leadership ones. All right, and then you need to measure somebody in a way that you can accurately identify whether they have those characteristics. That's why it's crucial to have an assessment tool that's accurate and not just get something because it's free. Well, if it's free, it's probably worth about that much money. All right.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
You know, but for sure, you need to have a quality one that needs to measure what it is trying to do. So obviously when we create a benchmark, we look at the characteristics that we can effectively measure. Then the third stage is you go and you look at what are the ideal characteristics, and then you look at the characteristics of the individual, and then you look at the gap or the distance between who they are and what you need, okay? And we have reports that do all of that, so it's not guesswork. Right? And we actually have a report that we can put up to 5 people that you're looking at on the same benchmark to make a decision regarding that person. Let's say it's a vice president for a company, or let's say it's a real estate team, and you're looking for a really good sales agent, or you're looking for a really good listing agent. Right? We come up with those characteristics, and then we can measure and compare up to 5 people that you're looking at to get into that. Now, one of the other cool things, really cool things about benchmarks, if you do it right, you might not have to go outside your organization to get somebody for that position. All right. Collins talks about putting people in the right seat on the bus. Well, what we do is, number one, we define where the bus should be going. Okay. Right. We don't just put you on a bus. All right. We want to know where the bus, if the bus is going in the right direction. So what are the characteristics? Right. And then what is the seat? Okay. Then we look to see of the characteristics, what characteristics go with that job. And then we see if we should put you on that seat. Now, what you might have, all right, I was talking to a president of a company earlier today, and one of the things we're looking at is you might have, let's say you've got a 15-person team, right? And you want to be better, okay? You want to be able to handle more stuff, right? Well, maybe if you did benchmarks, you would find that you don't have people on the ideal seat. And maybe out of those 15 people, you only need 12 if you put them in the right seats. So all of a sudden, you put them in the right seats because we do multiple benchmarks, all right? And then what happens is they're in the right seat. You need 3 less people, but you're producing 20 to 25% more with the 3 less people. Why? Yeah. Because they're doing what they're really good at instead of trying to do something that they're not that good.
So important, man. So important to our business, because I think sometimes we have people in the wrong seats and we're pushing too hard, stressing them out because they're in the wrong seat, which is great. So, I could talk to you forever. You know this. I want to let people know how they can get a hold of information from you, and any ideas you can give us on finding more information about this. So tell us how we can get a hold of you. What will be our first step of learning more about DISC?
Well, I'm going to answer that with 3 answers. The easiest way to get a hold of us is just go to our website, which is, you can see the spelling of my last name there. And so it's abelson.net. Okay, it's important. It's .net.com. You're going to go to an entirely different industry, and you're going to say, well, where the heck is Abelson? Right. All right, so it's got to be www.abelson.net. If you want to get to me, I'm going to make it real easy for you too, because it's just abelson@abelson.net. Okay. Second thing is, if you go to our website, we actually, and you can see it in our background now on our wall here, we have just launched a educational platform. All right, and part of it is a freebie. So if you're using our assessments, all right, we have how to use the assessments as a freebie. We have 3 different levels. All right, so go and click on where it says A-Learn on our website, okay, and go in and take a look at what A-Learn is, or just scroll down to our on our main page, and you'll see the 3 different levels: silver, gold, and platinum. Okay, right. The third thing is, there's a lot written out there on the disc. All right, and a lot of it's really good stuff. And there are people who have written, you know, a lot of good stuff, even though they have lousy assessment tools because they're not that accurate.
Right.
Okay. So what I would have you do, what I would recommend, you know, go to Amazon or go to Barnes and Noble or, and put in DISC and see which one is bought the most. Okay.
Okay.
And you can look at their rankings there. I mean, there is so much out there. I mean, there are hundreds of books on DISC. I mean, in our certification program, we include the #1 DISC-selling book in the world as part of what you get, and it's basically a 300-page book that gives you more information that you'd want to know about DISC, and we sell that too. So if you're interested, you can contact us. But it's a textbook, so it's pretty expensive. It's like $125, for it. But it's got incredible amounts of information. But if you sign up for a certification, it's part of the certification. But I would go and see which ones are the most popular, and go with that, because there's really a lot of good stuff out there. The same thing's you're going to find much less with the motives. You're going to find a lot on EQ, because there's at least 3 different major models of emotional intelligence out there. Okay, that are measured. I'm actually certified on 2 of the 3. And again, we have our own EQ.
Yeah. So, and Dr. Abelson is based in Austin, Texas. So if you're in Austin, Texas, give him a call.
Give us a holler, and be more than that. Well, anymore, even though we're in Austin, Texas, we're downtown Austin, Texas. You can interact with me real easy. Just contact me, and we'll get on Zoom, and we'll meet each other that way.
Yeah. And I can tell you that I don't hire anybody. I don't work with anybody unless I do a DISC. And I've learned so much from you over the years that I still learn more. I mean, that it's a constant evolution. You really don't have this down pat. You're constantly learning. So I think it's very valuable. Thanks for being on. I mean, I could talk to you forever on this subject matter, and I hope everybody else enjoyed it. Get in touch with Dr. Abelson. If you've never had a DISC done, I think it's crucial so that you understand yourself, so that you can understand other people. So Dr. Abelson, you're great.
I want to thank you for doing this. I always enjoy, interacting and talking with you. And, you say you're learning all the time. I've been using these assessments for 20 years. I've been using assessments for 40 years. And every day I'm learning new stuff myself. So it's always fun. So I can't wait until you invite me back again.
Yes. Looking forward to it. So guys, thank you so much. Have a great day. Again, thank you, Dr. Abelson, for being on Espresso. See ya. Bye-bye.
My pleasure.